Bye. Welcome to Speak Sex. I'm your host, Eurydice. I am excited about introducing you to today's guest, Dr. Lea Lis. She's a psychiatrist based in Southampton, I believe.
Yep.
She's known as the Shameless Psychiatrist, which is such a powerful adjective to take on. So, yeah. Thank you and commending you and appreciating you for that, for bridging that, bridging that kind of like a dichotomy there. Right, between like the respect and the power of the psychiatrist and the MD and, you know, the body and all its truths. So Dr. Lea is a double board certified adult and child psychiatrist, and she's committed to providing mental health care for children and teens, and reducing shame and changing the way we talk with them about sex, and also the way that we adults, understand our participation and contribution to, changing and improving our own mental and sexual health through trying to help our children. So I think it's kind of a double, right? It's a self-actualization and a self-growth in a way, when we, consciously try to help our children, not grow up with all of the traumas that we have and all the confusion and not have to like unlearn as much.
Yes, true.
Yeah. So, Dr. Lea, tell us a little bit about how you chose this field. If there is a personal narrative involved, or what called you to specialize in this, and then I will have a number of questions about what I feel are challenges nowadays, especially in the time of quarantine.
Yes. Well, Eve, I have always wanted to work with kids as some kind of therapist, psychiatrist. When I was 15, I started working at Hillside Hospital, which is in Long Island, with kids with attention deficit disorder, and then moving on up the line to doing my first research project at 18, 19 at Dartmouth on electroconvulsive therapy in teenagers and in children, which was very controversial. But obviously for children who weren't eating or weren't getting out of bed. And then I moved to, cognitive neuroscience major in college. Then I went to New York Medical College and always knew I was going to be a child psychiatrist from the start. It's definitely my calling. I'm so lucky to have a passion. And why I wrote the book, No Shame, Real Talk to Your Kids About Sex, Self-Confidence, and Healthy Relationship, is because of the Me Too movement. I just got tired of, it started well before that, because it's not like that was a surprise to me as a child psychiatrist. But, this idea that a lot of times I saw, both boys and girls being assaulted because they weren't able to effectively communicate their boundaries. And I'm not like blaming the victim here or anything like that, but their language around consent was so poor that they put themselves in harm's way. I think a lot of times these situations could have been avoided had they been given the language and the tools and been given permission to speak so much more openly about what they like and did not like. And it wasn't just sexual assault. That was such a small piece of it. The thing that really got to be in my bonnet was the fact that so many girls and boys were not enjoying the sex they were having. They felt obligated to have sex, and, they were not enjoying it. They were not experiencing pleasure. And that made me so sad. And I always tell the kids I work with, if you could do the crime, you could do the time. So if you're having sex, we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about masturbation. We're going to talk about pleasure. We're going to talk about orgasms. And they always looked at me terrified. And I'm thinking, well, don't you ever talk about this with the person you're having sex with? And they look at me like, no, I can't believe you would talk about it. You just do it. I'm like, So this is why I wrote this book. It's like starting with a parenting book, obviously. I'd really love to eventually communicate with children directly, although I don't think they'd read a book. So I started making little YouTube videos for them. And I really want to, really get in there and start to talk about shame and how we communicate. So that's my background.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's exactly what the mission of this podcast is. Like you just named it. You might as well have named it. And, it's also, it's very dear to my heart in the sense of I have a 20-year-old daughter. I raised her as a single mom. And so because I'm an artist and a writer, I was like the cool mom. So, all of her friends basically grew up at my house and would come to me when they would have, sexual crises, whether it's identity crisis or, unexpected consequences or huge questions, or even like these basic questions like, why don't I feel anything, when I'm being intimate. So, and they all said that there is no one I can trust. I don't trust anyone to tell me the truth, which is also part of what we're experiencing. I think in the modern moment is a lot of teenagers, just like a lot of adults, are not sure which version of the truth to trust. I feel like in our generation. So in a lot of the parents' generation, there was no language, so it's not like most of us grew up with, a fluency, a linguistic fluency when it comes to like our sexual choices, which then we could pass on to the children, right? And it's just shocking to think that, like so many generations after the sexual revolution, when we've made so much progress with the pill and in vitro insemination and like DNA paternity tests, and you could go down the list, sex change, like medical sex change, hormonal sex change, and I mean, it's the list of like the changes that have been achieved on the, let's say, scientific level is extraordinary in the past 2 or 3 generations, but that hasn't been updated in like the interpersonal and linguistic level. So the average person still finds it very awkward to speak about sex to especially their children, especially within family, which is supposed to be like the sacred non-sexual environment. And I feel like the most basic confusion there is that many people still kind of think that speaking is the same as doing. So like when I say I try to say the most the place where you start is speaking sex is not having sex. It's totally different, but somehow it feels tainted in a similar way. So, everything is kind of like stays in the place of like metaphors and generalizations. Yeah.
And fear mongering, really. I mean, if parents do choose to talk to their kids about sex, it's to scare the crap out of them, pretty much, but the little they do say, oh, you're going to get pregnant, or, oh, he just wants to have sex with you. He doesn't really, all boys that age just want to have sex. They don't really like care about you. They won't, it's all this kind of fear mongering. And it's such a shame because it's not what I see, both the boys and the girls in my practice genuinely, want to have sex in a romantic, intimate, fulfilled situation, but they're taught that they shouldn't want to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend because it won't last, which, oh, you're just going to go off to college and break up. I'm like, so what? So what? Let them form this bonded relationship. Let them have an intimate sexual relationship in high school when you're safe to protect them from, you're there to be a shoulder to cry on. Like, that's great. That's what you want. Why are you discouraging it as a parent? And, this whole idea that like, I mean, we all still bought into the idea that your first sexual partner is going to be your husband or wife. I mean, come on. I mean, everyone knows that's not reality. So why do we push these messages that are in a completely, unrelevant to society now, instead of saying, yes, have a boyfriend or girlfriend, get your heart broken, do it here now. You have me to be your sounding board while you're safe in this loving home. That's what we should be pushing for. Now, I'm not saying when they're not ready, not when they're yet too young to really understand what that means, but when they are ready, then, and there's ways to assess that, obviously, and I can talk you through those ways, but like when they are ready, that's what we should be hoping for. And that's what we should be pushing for, not random drunk sexual encounters at some dumb party that they, will probably not even barely remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so true. Yeah. And so what do you feel would be some systemic changes, in the way that we handle this issue of like, a lack of a respectable language and a normative, social, exposure to, sexual dialogue.
Right.
What could be a systemic change that would actually, in a generation or two, make everybody, shame-free?
Sex positive. Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, I can think of a lot of things, but I think in terms of our education and parenting, it's explaining consent from a very early age but not around sexuality, but just around the body. This is my body, my body's bubble. Who is allowed into my body bubble, and how do I want to be touched is something that should be taught really young kids, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. You shouldn't be spanked. You shouldn't be, touched in a way that's uncomfortable, you don't like. You shouldn't be forced to be tickled by a parent when you don't want to be tickled, or anybody for that matter. And you get to choose who touches you, and you get to express how it feels. Like, if that feels good, please brush my hair. I like that. I like to have my back scratched. Will you scratch my back? And as a parent, you should say, can I scratch your back? There are things that parents have to do. They have to brush your teeth when you're little. They have to comb your hair, and you explain that whether or not you like this kind of touch, I'm going to have to do it because it's important for your health. But other kinds of touch, you get to control. And that's how it starts. So that's one systemic
that's
change.
A beautiful, That's a beautiful first step, because we teach them to give the body a voice, right? Instead of like keeping it, silenced and like the nether regions, right? Like the devalued aspect of us, right? Or like the mind or the soul or whatever is higher. Yeah, so that's a great start. Go ahead.
And then, it can move up. It can certainly be taught in schools, all about, the proper terminology for the body parts: labia, scrotum, vagina, anus. Vagina's on the inside. You don't see it. So you're not seeing someone's vagina unless, you're looking for it. So therefore, we have to give them the proper names for their body parts. We have to teach them how to clean them up and how to keep them safe. And all those things that can be taught very easily in schools, should be taught in schools. And then, children who know the names for those things are less likely to be assaulted and more likely to be believed. A sexual predator goes up to a kid and the kid says, please don't touch my vulva, I don't like that. The guy's running for the hills because they know what that means, right? Yeah. They're like, that kid knows what that means. It's definitely going to tell his parents, right? And more likely to be believed, because when you go into the police officer's, office and says, that man over there touched my vulva, immediately they'll believe that child. So both of those things, so I think around the actual proper names for the body parts. And then it goes all the way up to this idea of, we're all responsible for consent. Consent is not just me and you negotiating something. It's also society is responsible for consent. We have to stop creating situations in which it's easy for consent to be violated. For example, it's amazing to me that when I'm at a bar and there's a drunk girl, to see how many men swarm around her looking to pick her up. That is disgraceful behavior. And, obviously she cannot negotiate consent. So I do believe that it should start with consent monitors at parties like they have at the House of Yes, which is a great nightclub in Manhattan, in which they have people with armbands saying, where are the consent monitors? If you feel uncomfortable, if someone is touching you in the way you don't like, you come to me. We will make sure it gets taken care of. But it could happen at frat parties where one fraternity provides a sober consent monitor to another party to make sure there are no drunk boys or men or women who are falling over, stumbling. If they are, make sure they get home safely. They have a friend to walk them home who they can feel like they can trust, that they follow up with that person the next day to make sure they got home okay. And we can create the cultural change that's needed to protect our young people and protect our bodies. It's not just about, it's creating a framework around consent.
Yeah. And also, I feel that if there is, a widespread consciousness about sexuality and acceptance and, separation of, the actual like biological and physical hormonal, experience from like the moral aspect, right? Mm-hmm. If we somehow like turn this around and agree that like being sexual is morally good because everybody is, and without it, like the species will die, and we don't need like the government coming in and putting a stamp that we're married before we can be sexual, then once we kind of separate, free sexuality from all that kind of like moral, ancestral, patriarchal, baggage, of like which human owns whom, then I think that, naturally people won't need to get drunk or medicated, high in order to like, mate or flirt or, go ahead and be sexual. Because, part of the reason that, so many, especially of the young, get drunk or high before they can like relax enough to get sexual is the extreme discomfort, because there is something in their social conditioning that tells them that this is taboo, that this is dirty, that this is frightening, that there is loss involved, that there is huge risk involved. So like, cleaning up that narrative, I feel, would, inevitably change the tendency to drink or smoked or get high or whatever it is, ketamine. I mean, there is like the list changes of of the ways of like self-medicating, but it's just a very common, at least like passage into adulthood, to be sexual because your body, your hormones want you to, through, inebriation, through loss of consciousness, because being conscious and sexual is so hard still to our day, because, we're burdened with like all of those, as you said,
messages.
All of those no's, all of those messages that tell us, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it.
Yes. I agree, and we lost sight
though we're
of
like built to do it.
We lost sight of the reason why we do it. Obviously, it's to reproduce, but no, it's really for pleasure. I mean, it lights up your dopamine system like nothing else. We're hardwired to do it because it feels good. It's pleasurable, and that's why we're so motivated to do it, because it feels good. It's pleasurable, and for some reason, we have taught our children, to fear it and to not really embrace their pleasure and their sexual pleasure. I mean, even as early as, how we handle masturbation in our culture is kind of strange, I have like parents who'd say, well, I don't like when my, son or daughter has their door locked because I don't know what they're doing in there. And I'm kind of looking at them like, hello, they're masturbating. Like, why would you want to walk in on that? Like, give them their space, what do you think they're doing in there? I mean, unless you really believe your kid is like got like a drug den in there or doing something terrible, which is not the case in the majority of the kids. Like, give them their privacy to explore their bodies. Don't like walk in on them or not allow them to have a door lock, because like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, of course they need their space to explore their bodies. They don't want you walking in. I don't know. I think it's very strange and backwards how we, we put up these barriers for them to become successful adults, happy adults who experience pleasure. Also, when they go through their period of first sexual initiation, and I hate the term "lose your virginity." I'm sure you feel the same way, do they? Don't lose anything.
I do, yeah.
They gain entrance
Yeah.
into a new world, right? Of pleasure and excitement. So I call it sexual initiation. And when it comes to sexual initiation, we don't give them a safe place to do it. We don't create in a safe environment, like, identifying a place where they should have sex, identifying the birth control they should be using, kind of helping them along navigate those waters. And also saying, how was it? Are you okay? How are you feeling about it as a parent? Can I help you? Can I give you some advice?
Yeah, and I feel that cuts both ways, because that's why that's why my question, my challenge, at least to myself always, is how do we do a systemic change, because I feel that what happens is that, even, you in your work, you will see a number of people, and that number of people may get helped and may, have a better time or raise, healthier children or adolescents, and that's fine. But the overall society, we as a society have to make like a systemic kind of like, mass change. Otherwise, it doesn't really make so much of a difference because, the peer pressure remains the same. I experienced it as a mom. I definitely, spoke with my daughter from the get-go. I respected her choices before she could speak. I respected her body, and I gave her agency, long before she even had agency, because that was so important to me, because that's, the field that, I've been working on. But I did discover again and again and again that society, would kind of like force me to, hide or my like full identity in order to protect her from like shame, from being shunned. So like if I was a writer, but when I was writing about sex, I found that, kids in school, in elementary school, would talk about it and, shame her. Then later, as an adolescent, again, I saw, when they need to individuate, which is very normal and normative. There is a moment, different perhaps in age in every child, but inevitably a parent who is, devoted to her children, a mother, will find that the child needs to pull away and reject that, narrative in order to choose for themselves and discover themselves and not just be a copycat. And whenever that is, then they kind of like espouse what their peers say. So unless the peers are also kind of like equally enlightened and relaxed and open about this type of topics, then the child of like, let's say, an enlightened or conscious parents will adopt this kind of like old decayed narratives because they want to be like their peers, or because that will be their alternative to like rebel. It's like if you're progressive and your child becomes conservative or whatever you want to call it. I'm just trying to simplify things. But basically, if as a society we can somehow, embrace sexuality and make it a positive part of life for everyone from the get-go, right? Then it will be easier to kind of like, sustain this level of like, health. And it will never change like anxiety or mental health or, disorders. Or, there are so many issues, body dysmorphia, gender dysmorphia. We can't fix everything, but just beginning with a general, saying yes to the body and its needs, right? Rather than no or hiding, I think would be a big social advance. And, I always do wonder how that could happen. One way you mentioned is schooling, starting very young in school and maybe including it in biology class. So it doesn't even have to be called sex ed, and it's like the human body, from the get-go, like what's, your body, your human body, how does it work?
And that's the Northern European approach to consent and sexuality. They have an amazing sexual comprehensive the Dutch, curriculum that starts in kindergarten. And my favorite part about it, I studied a lot when I was looking into my book, is that they talk about love a lot. They talk about how little kids can fall in love. And they'll say, well, maybe, Johnny and Bobby are in love and that's why they're acting like this. They talk about it. And they do also think a lot about gender and try to keep a lot of gender neutrality in their programs. They even have gender neutral preschools and gender neutral schools, which is, definitely far out there. But I love their approach to love and how they talk about it so freely and openly. And they don't make it a construct about sexuality. They make it about something different that even young people young children can be in love. And that's something I wrote about in my book. It's the heartbreak that could go along. I remember being 8 or 9 and just falling in love with my friend that I met and heartbreak when we were separated. It was terrible. And it wasn't sexual. It was just this horrible feeling because we're hardwired to experience it no matter how old we are. It doesn't just kick in because we're 13. And that is something we can teach also, how to cope and deal with rejection and all that stuff.
Yeah. And how to kind of take ourselves, more lightly. I feel that especially recently we have not been served well by identity politics, because it comes with the assumption that an identity is something that kind of is for life. And I feel personally that, it would be so much healthier if we knew from the beginning, when we're still formed or forming our ideas of the world, that, we play roles and we play parts and we take on identities and we change. And our identities will keep changing, and we can have multiple identities, social identities at once. So that, if we get rejected and if we find ourselves hurt, or we find ourselves leaving a relationship because we want to, there isn't all that guilt, there isn't that assumption that that identity should have lasted for life. I think that our understanding of who we are, that we're changeable, is another part of the narrative that could be improved on, so that we would have room for the unexpected. Yeah. Which, life is full of.
Right.
Right? We can't control it. So knowing that, expecting that would be useful, especially for the younger generations who are not even, whose mental, capacities are not, fully developed yet. So,
yes, I agree.
Yeah. So what do you find the biggest concerns that you think are most representative of the current, generation X, Z, the internet, the children raised by the internet, on the internet, the TikTok generation? That's my first question. And then I'll ask about quarantine.
Well, I do worry a lot about the impact of pornography on young children and developing minds. In general, I think pornography is not harmful, used in moderation by an adult, but very young children and actually can be, great and fun. But very young children watching pornography can be problematic because they don't have the framework or the context to really process it. And so I can see issues of, there's some studies that say that, children who are watching, teenagers watching pornography are more likely to try kind of sexual things that are not quite ready for, more violent sex acts than other children, other teenagers. And also, teenage girls who watch a lot of pornography are more likely to accept more violence or have more self-esteem issues because they're trying to keep up with what they see in pornography or the body image ideals that you see in pornography, which are, exactly perfect, specimens of the human body, which are not, realistic of what most teenage girls and boys look like. And so, I think pornography is a real problem, and we should do the best we can as parents to keep our young children away from it, our young teenagers away from it. And then when they are, at some point you can't control them. Like obviously they have access. And at that point it's more, how do you allow them to be really responsible connoisseurs of pornography? So everything from ethical pornography, like how do you find ethical pornography, to how to understand that you do not need to be like them or, compete with them, or that, consent is happening off camera prior to being filmed, and that sexually transmitted diseases and, contraception also occurs off camera in ways that you don't see, but usually is going on. So, they have a basic understanding of that, might be less affected by it in a negative way and maybe can use it in a positive way.
Yeah. I feel that a big confusion there is also, I don't know if you agree, it's an unexpected outcome, I feel, of like women's sexual liberation. But what has happened is the conflation of like consent and monetization. So, for me, it kind of leads to confusing moments, especially again for like young women, young boys, young, youths, who understand consent as something that can be given in exchange for money. And I think that, that is very complex because, I don't think it's healthy. I wish we wouldn't do that because it kind of stretches the limits and confuses and challenges the whole, discussion, and also the whole, our whole like cultural effort to, make consent acceptable by all, So on one hand, we ask all, everyone, all genders to ask for consent. And on the other hand, we kind of like allow consent to include, financial reward. So then, is it real or not? Because if the young people who are employed in making porn are consenting to being, let's say, violated or raped on camera, but they are, being paid and they have given their consent because they have, been paid for it, then it leads to the idea that, well, you should consent to a partner who can pay for dinner or pay for movies or pay for a trip or pay for clothes. And then before you know it, it becomes hazy, where is your agency, your will, your choice? And, it just gets murky again. It gets, brought back into that whole thing of like, the male provider or, all kinds of like cliches that we should have left in the past that no longer serve us. So, yeah, I think that whole aspect of it, of like the profession, is a challenge. And, it's something that we as a society need to kind of clarify, maybe come up with like different words for the, professional participation, make it more respectable and bring it more in the light, Yeah.
Well, and there is a lot of ethically made pornography, which is what I like to view and encourage, even kids that are viewing pornography to think about if it's ethically made, which means that, there's things written on the website about like how the actors are paid, where they're found, their ages, and how they do their STD testing. And, you can look it up. I mean, Erica Lust is very into
Yes,
this, and
very much. Yeah.
and she talks a lot about it, and did this Moms Make Porn, and I give her a lot of credit. I mean, she is trying to do what you say, trying to make it culturally relevant and and healthy for people to view, and I think that that's something that should be explained to a teenager. And also, you can vote with your, they say you can, by purchasing something, you vote with your money. Like if you buy grass-fed beef, or you don't contribute to the pollution of the earth by, buying green fuel, or, putting solar panels in your house. You can also think about how you buy your pornography.
Yeah, truth. So, what are some of the challenges that you're hearing, from teenagers and parents during COVID? I'm sure there must be many because of quarantine, right?
Well, I think it's the rise. I'm calling it the rise of the lonely girl. Like girls are really struggling with loneliness. They're very social creatures. I'm not saying boys aren't as well, and I'm not trying to put a complete gender to this, but my experience is that girls really need face-to-face interaction. They need the smell, the touch of another girl or boy, the pheromones. They're very, their dopamine reward system is hot-wired to need intense social bonding with their peers at that age. And for that matter, for the rest of their lives. But certainly any parent of 12, 13, 14-year-old girl will tell you that all they care about is their friends, and they light up like a Christmas tree when their friend texts or calls. And, if they're just stuck with you all day long, they'll be miserable. And, it's not just about the Zoom calls. It's not enough. They need face-to-face. It's how they're hardwired. Our evolution does not really understand Zoom as to be a substitute for, pheromones and all the nonverbal communication that's going on. So I definitely see a huge uptick in loneliness, depression, and self-esteem issues in teenagers, especially the girls I work with. The boys are super happy playing, online
video games and
games.
Yeah.
They don't seem to be as affected. It's my experience. I'm not saying. It does bear out in a couple of studies. They're showing it out and bearing out in a couple of studies that are coming out. It's certainly my experience. So for the teenage girls, I'm really encouraging parents to find COVID pods of, like-minded families who are willing to allow the girls to interact. And if they're being homeschooled, to really take into account their need for that kind of face-to-face interaction with other girls or boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure it has, delayed the, sexual experience for teens and, preteens throughout the world.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another, I mean, if you think about it, they're all kind of halted, kept back. Like the freshman class, going into college right now, how they are impeded, in their... kind of expectation to be free, to be on their own, to, try, life with their peers without the parents present. So when we think about that on a worldwide level, that's a huge, change, social change right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be stunting their development, their sexuality and all of that. And, I just hope the vaccine comes out within a year, or actually 3 or 4 or 5 months, and kids can get back to some sort of normalcy by next summer. Because yes, of course, it's stunting their development without question. The only thing I'm not clear about is how long it's going to last for. I mean, there's been periods where people have been in war, or were generations where they lost all the men to war, and there were a generation of women who didn't have anyone to marry. And obviously we all recovered. We're still here. We will recover, but it is definitely affecting them. And I've never been busier, God knows. As a psychiatrist, I mean, I feel bad for my friends who are losing their jobs, but mine is certainly steady.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. And you do take insurance, right? So I feel that's that's another one of those, mass kind of systemic changes or upgrades or, or hacks that, we need to do where health insurance, covers much more of the, not just therapeutic model, because, therapy implies, some sort of illness or disease or, discomfort, but also just the, the supportive level, So, for example, now there is like such a renaissance of coaches and coaching in all kinds of areas in life, But then once again, that's only for the people who can afford it, and it's not even covered by insurance, for those who are insured. So, in my ideal world, at least, that should all be covered by an insurance that's, paid and available to more or less everyone, because it's a very basic need for a healthier, happier society. So, yeah.
Of course, the studies on this show that like every dollar we invest in mental health care comes back directly into tax dollars, to decrease crime, to less prison sentences. I mean, it is the most cost-effective thing we could ever invest in as a society. The problem is that the health insurance companies don't see that benefit. It's the society, like the criminal justice, the educational systems that see the benefit. So that's the problem. It's like different payers, different pockets, which is why I really believe that that mental health care system should be funded by the community, because they're the one that directly reap the reward from it. So they should have community mental health programs.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So in a way, what would you compare it with? Like the same way that the community takes care of playgrounds or
homeless people,
libraries,
like you might have a homeless shelter in a community.
Right.
You might have programs too for drug addiction in the community. You put the mental health care system being funded by the community in mental health clinics, and they're funded by the community. The taxpayers pay for it. And the money goes right back, because people won't drop out of high school, and then they're more likely to get better jobs, and then they're more likely to pay higher tax dollars, because most people don't leave their communities. Most people will stay to the community they were raised. And so you're investing in those children that grow up to be productive members of society, and then they don't train, they don't become drug addicts, they don't end up in jail, they don't, so it goes right back around. And my community of Southampton, we have a great mental health care system through this clinic called Family Service League, which is actually funded by
it's called what? Service League?
Family Service League.
Nice.
Family Service. Mm-hmm. And it's funded partially by insurance. They'll take Medicaid, Medicare, and health insurance, but that only pays for like half of it because the reimbursement rates are so low. And the other half comes from grants from the local governments, who recognize that they have no place to send their kids when they cut themselves or want to commit suicide at the school. They were sending them to the hospitals. Hospital wasn't doing anything. They got sick of it. So they funded this whole system to keep the kids out of the hospital, to, put social workers in the schools where they could actually do, treatment that, the kids could then get evaluations with psychiatrists, and everything. So it's reduced the hospitalization rate, the death rate, everything by order of magnitude, and nobody would question the use of that money and how it's been spent.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly, yeah. That's wonderful. And really, it's just like a local initiative, and every locality could consider it, especially, if you're like tax dollars, right? If the property values and the tax dollars allow for that. Yeah, I think that's great. That's the way to do it in America. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little. So you wrote your book recently, right?
Yes, it's called No Shame, Real Talk with Your Kids about sex, self-confidence, and healthy relationships. And, you can look it up on www.noshamebook.com or shamelesspsychiatrist.com. And it's basically, it's a parenting book around, raising your kids to be sex positive, body positive. And it took me 3 years to write it. And I'm really proud of it. I think it addresses a lot of things we're talking about today, from like pornography to communication skills. I think one thing that you would really like from, listening to your other episodes of your podcast is this idea of being, owning your own sex story in order to pass down intergenerational wisdom, not trauma. So how do you want to spin your sex story to pass down the right messages to your kids? Whether or not you were sexually assaulted, or you just had a lot of failed relationships, or you had a divorce, or whatever it is your narrative is, you can always spin that story and you can make it positive. You can find the pearls of wisdom and you can pass down those instead of passing down all the scary trauma, which just ends up creating intergenerational trauma and doesn't end up helping. So, there's a whole part of the book about that. It's something I'm really passionate about. So no matter what your story is, there is a way to pass down the right messages.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Absolutely. Yes. Passing down the positive and the empowerment, right? Instead of like the inner judge and the inner victim is so much better. And if we like take a moment, if we like slow down our reactivity and think about it, I think that's what we would all choose, But sometimes we just kind of go unconsciously, in this like accelerated time, scheduling that will.
And we live in our emotional.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We live in our emotional mind instead of our wise mind. We're operating in this state of emotion rather than the state of being wise. We're all capable of being wise at all times if we access that part through therapy, through meditation, through exercise, through whatever. Right. Calm that emotional mind down. Right. And then you're able to access the rest.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's called the second reaction time, which is like, don't do the first thing that you want to do, do the second or, like count to whatever, 100, 1,000, or like take 20 breaths or however many, it's not about the numbers. It's about slowing things down so it gives you time to have agency to choose, for yourself, so that you can actually do something that represents you instead of like stuff you've picked up from, your upbringing or TV or, whatever mass social brainwash, has gotten to you. So freeing our children from that I think is a way to also like free ourselves from it. We learn as we teach our children, we teach ourselves. So, that's how we started, and I feel it's a good place to close, because it's an encouragement for all parents or, co-parents or kind of like spiritual parents, that everything we teach, we also teach ourselves. So it's double fulfillment. So thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
It was a beautiful conversation. We learned a lot, and everybody, put all the notes about your information, your book at the end of the show, and we'll be in touch. And until everyone out there, until we speak again, keep speaking sex. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.